Welcome to the Daily AI News Digest. This broadcast is sponsored by bestai.org. Let's look at today's market realities. It's June 9, 2026, and our objective with this explainer is to deliver a grounded, factual analysis of today's structural market shifts, cutting entirely through the marketing spin to bring you the cold business data. Here are the core headlines driving the sector today. OpenAI has confidentially filed its S1. Apple has officially introduced its rebuilt Siri AI ecosystem at WWDC. Google is enforcing a critical infrastructure transition for its enterprise developers. And Anthropic has altered its privacy policy data sharing thresholds. Let's break down this concentrated wave of public filings and critical shifts in developer tooling. Starting with the biggest moves today, we're looking at the Silicon Gold Rush and a fundamental restructuring of market architecture among the sector's private pioneers. $852 billion, that's the number defining today's market. Following a legal victory in May that dismissed Elon Musk's lawsuit regarding their corporate structure, OpenAI has formally submitted a confidential draft S1 to the SEC. They're targeting this massive $852 billion post-money valuation, and to justify that capital structure to the public markets, they are reporting 900 million weekly active users on ChatGPT. But what makes this filing structurally significant is the timeline. We're observing a historic public market cluster. Anthropic submitted its own S1 on June 1st. OpenAI followed on the 8th, and SpaceX is scheduled for its market debut on June 12th. From an analyst perspective, this creates a major benchmarking constraint. Whichever of these heavily capitalized, infrastructure-intensive firms prices first is going to effectively set the valuation ceiling and the financial expectations for the entire frontier tech sector. Next up, product and model realities. We are tracking major strategic updates from Google, Anthropic, and Apple aimed at securing both developer integration and consumer lock-in. If you look at the data matrix here, you can see the distinct approaches each platform is taking to capture market share. Google is focused heavily on professional cloud developers. Anthropic is targeting knowledge workers with its Claude models while managing a strict 5-hour usage constraint. And Apple is aiming directly at the everyday consumer with on-device processing. Let's look at the specific operating constraints for each, starting with Google. Google is actively forcing a hard transition for its developer base. By June 18th, they're disabling their legacy Gemini command line tools for free and pro-tier users. Developers are being forced to migrate to the new anti-gravity CLI. It's a Go-based, unified architecture specifically optimized for asynchronous, multi-agent workflows. This reflects a definitive industry pivot away from simple prompt response interfaces and toward complex background task orchestration. In direct response to these competitive platform shifts, Anthropic is playing a retention game. The company is temporarily doubling its standard 5-hour usage limits on the Claude Cowork platform through July 5th, at no additional charge. In an environment where enterprise compute costs are rising, Anthropic is choosing to absorb those operational expenses in the short term. They need to aggressively incentivize workflow integration and establish platform dependence ahead of their public offering. Turning to consumer hardware, Apple utilized WWDC to announce Siri AI. It's a system-wide overhaul featuring context-aware on-screen processing and new capabilities like spatial reframing. But here's the reality check. While Apple is using its own private cloud compute, the system heavily integrates Google's Gemini models. And the most critical takeaway is the strict hardware constraint. This technology will only function on the iPhone 15 Pro, the iPhone 16 lineup, and M-series Mac devices. Pivoting now to regulation, policy, and business signals, we're seeing notable compliance adjustments and institutional moves actively shaping the governance of these systems. A significant policy adjustment is drawing scrutiny from privacy advocates this week. Anthropic has published a revised privacy policy taking effect in July. Crucially, the update replaces language that previously required formal court orders for data disclosure. The new threshold allows the company to share user data with law enforcement based on an internal good faith belief that disclosure is necessary. This marks a very notable shift in user data protection protocols. Geopolitical regulations are also dictating product availability. Apple's Siri AI rollout faces immediate and severe geographic roadblocks. At launch, this technology will be entirely excluded from the European Union due to friction with Digital Markets Act requirements. It also remains excluded from the Chinese market as Apple navigates pending local regulatory approvals. This fragments Apple's global software ecosystem considerably right out of the gate. Looking at physical infrastructure, Microsoft is deploying massive capital to secure hardware advantages. The company committed $10 billion to support Japan's sovereign AI strategy. At the same time, Microsoft is in early-stage discussions to run Anthropic's Claude inference workloads on their custom 3nm Maya 200 silicon via Azure. It's a calculated move to diversify compute dependencies away from standard GPU supply chains and validate their internal chip development. Finally, the analyst's take. Let's decode the business reality of what these intersecting developments actually mean. Cutting through the PR noise, the objective business reality is mapped out in these 3 steps. First, high compute costs are triggering what analysts call tokenomics malaise among enterprise clients. Second, to prevent churn, vendors like Anthropic are forced to temporarily subsidize usage to secure deep workflow integration. And finally, developers are being forced to migrate to complex, semi-autonomous, multi-agent frameworks, as we saw with Google. These vendors are absorbing high costs now purely to capture long-term enterprise reliance. So, what is the market watching next? Enterprise decision-makers are keeping a close eye on the June 12th SpaceX debut, which will serve as a direct litmus test for the impending OpenAI and Anthropic IPO wave. We are also tracking potential operational friction around Google's June 18th developer transition, Apple's ongoing negotiations in Europe, and whether these restrictive central policies drive a surge in local open-source adoption, specifically models like Llama 4 and Gemma 4. Which brings us to our final analytical question for this broadcast. With Anthropic, OpenAI, and SpaceX moving into the public markets simultaneously, which firm's pricing will ultimately define the financial constraints of this new technological era? Thank you for joining us for today's factual market breakdown. To further explore these enterprise realities and prepare your organization, we invite you to visit our sponsor, best-ai.org.